A young man named Albert, who lived in the city of Port Harcourt and worked with P&P Oil and Gas Company, stopped at a small market near his house one day on his way back from work to buy some foodstuffs, as he was still a single man. Upon arriving at the market, he saw a pretty young lady named Oma, who was helping her mother sell foodstuffs. Her mother was a widow. From the very moment Albert laid his eyes on Oma, he felt something like love stir in his heart for her. However, considering his social status, he felt Oma was below his class, so he tried to suppress his feelings toward her. He quickly bought the foodstuffs and went straight home. Oma's mother noticed how Albert looked at her daughter lustfully while purchasing the items, but Oma didn't notice anything, as she was busy trying to make sales for her poor mother. As days passed, Albert kept coming to Oma's mother's shop to buy foodstuffs even when he didn't need anything. He just came around to set his eyes on the pretty Oma. One day, Albert could no longer hold back his feelings. He went straight to Oma and started complimenting her, telling her how beautiful she was. Oma couldn't help but smile and said in a calm tone, "Thank you, sir." Albert responded, "There's no need to call me sir. My name is Albert." "And you?" Oma calmly said, "I'm Oma, and I'm from Delta State." That day, they exchanged contacts. Oma didn't have a phone yet, so she gave him her mother's contact and told him to call only at 9 p.m. Albert left with so much joy in his heart. That same night, at exactly 9 p.m., Oma's mother had gone to bed. Oma sneaked into her mother's room, picked up the phone, and went outside to wait for Albert's call, as he had promised to call her that night. Oma waited for an hour, but Albert never called. She became worried and felt disturbed, wondering why he hadn't called. 2 hours later, Albert still hadn't called, as he promised. Oma went back to bed, her heart filled with so much pain and disappointment. Something that looked like love. The next morning, Oma woke up very early and rushed to her mother's phone to see if Albert had called, but there was no missed call from him. She quickly rushed to do her morning chores and then went straight to her mother's shop. On her way, she met Albert. But before she could greet him, Albert immediately apologized for not calling as he promised. Oma nodded and said, "It's fine," and then she left immediately. Albert was surprised by how she left in such a hurry. Oma already felt disappointed in him for not sticking to his promises. So Albert left for work, hoping to see her on his way back in the evening. That same evening, after Albert had closed from work, he changed his mind and took a different route to his house. He got home, freshened up, and then dressed up looking charming. He went straight to Oma's mother's shop to buy some ingredients to make soup. Albert is a great cook, anyway. When Oma saw Albert, her heart skipped a beat, and she became tense. Oma's mother had gone for a meeting and wouldn't be back for 2 days, so she was alone in the shop when Albert arrived. He cracked her up as usual and made her feel relaxed. By this point, Oma had already fallen in love with Albert but was just waiting for him to let the cat out of the bag. The conversation started between the two, and Albert asked, "How about your mother?" Oma replied, "My mother has gone for a village meeting and will be back in 2 days." At that moment, Oma felt she had met her Prince Charming, so they continued talking. At some point, Albert asked Oma, "Will it be okay if you spend the night at my place since your mother won't be coming back today?" Oma, being the only child of her parents and having no one else at home to take care of, nodded her head with gladness and said to Albert, "That will be nice, spending the night at your place." Albert waited for her to finish packing up things in her mother's shop since it was already evening. Oma asked him to wait while she rushed home to freshen up, but Albert said, "There's no need for that. I'll get you something to wear after freshening up. That won't be a problem." So they went straight to Albert's house. That night, Albert asked Oma to help make the soup. She gladly accepted to cook the meal. She went to the kitchen while Albert went outside to get her something to wear. By the time he got back, Oma had already finished with the meal and served it. They both enjoyed the meal and had so much fun. 1 hour later, Omar went to the bathroom to take a shower. She saw a female pad in his bathroom. She quietly finished bathing, came out, and asked him, "Are you married?" Albert said, "No, why do you ask?" Omar said, "Because I saw a female pad in your bathroom." Albert replied, "Oh, that. My sister was here last week. Maybe she forgot it there." Omar said, "It's fine." She went straight to the visitor's room to change. She opened the nylon bag and screamed, "Albert!" Albert ran into the visitor's room, thinking something had happened to her, only to find out she was excited about the red, beautiful nightie he bought for her. Omar had never worn such a beautiful nightie before. She looked at herself in the mirror and screamed, "I look so beautiful. Thank you so much, Albert." Immediately, Albert slowly held Omar from behind, rubbing her shoulder down to her waist, kissing her all over. Omar couldn't help but go down with him. At this point, the deed had been done. The next morning, Omar rushed back home so she could help with her mother's business, and Albert was also getting ready for work. As the days passed, Albert enjoyed the moments he shared with Omar and craved more time with her, as he was the one who took her virginity that night. Albert often called Omar to check up on her, but that was only at night when her mother had gone to bed. 2 weeks later, Albert bought Omar a new phone, a new SIM card, and some beautiful clothes and shoes. One night, he called her. Omar picked up the call and was so excited to hear from Albert. Then Albert said to her, "Tomorrow is Sunday. Can you come over to my house and spend some time with me? I have some gifts for you." Omar said, "I'm not sure, but I will try my best to come see you." Albert said, "I will be so glad to have you here." The love and affection kept growing in her heart. She kept nurturing it, not knowing where it was leading them. On that Sunday afternoon, Omar's mother had gone to a church program, and there was no way for Omar to call Albert to let him know when she was coming over to his place. Omar was disturbed, wondering if she should go without calling him on the phone. A lot of thoughts came to her mind. She decided, since I can't call him before going, let me just take him by surprise. She dressed up, looking all beautiful, and went straight to Albert's house. When she arrived, everything was quiet. She called him twice, "Albert, Albert," but no one answered. The doors were open, so Omar entered the parlor. The music was playing so calmly, but no one was there. She tried calling Albert again, but there was no response. At this point, Omar became so scared. She tried to enter his room to see if everything was okay with him. On her way to his room, Omar saw a red female underwear and a female wig on the floor. Her heart skipped, and she said to herself, "Am I dreaming or what?" She checked very carefully to make sure she was sure of what she saw. Omar turned back to leave Albert's house, and immediately a lady came out of Albert's room, wearing only her undergarments, to pick up her underwear from the parlor. She asked Omar, "Who are you looking for?" Omar quickly said, "Nobody," and left immediately, with so much pain and tears in her eyes. A month later, Omar found out she was pregnant. One evening, Omar called Albert to tell him that she was pregnant with his child. Albert, knowing fully well that he couldn't settle down with Omar, denied the pregnancy, telling Omar to go look for who got her pregnant. Omar burst into tears, knowing fully well that Albert was the first and last man she had ever known. Omar was so afraid of telling her mother what was going on. 2 weeks later, she became so sick that her mother took her to the hospital. That was when Omar's mother found out that her daughter was pregnant. They went straight home, and her mother kept asking her who got her pregnant, but Omar refused to open up. Her mother threatened to chase her out of the house if she failed to tell her who was responsible. After several threats from her mother, she ran away from home and went to a place called Romola. She roamed the streets of Romola with the pregnancy, begging just to feed. A few months later, a young, beautiful lady named Margaret saw her begging for money. She was looking so unkempt, barely bathing or taking care of her hair. She was almost looking like a mad person when Lady Margaret saw her. Lady Margaret asked her, "What is your name, and why are you on the streets of Romola with this pregnancy?" Oma calmly said, "My name is Oma. I'm from Delta State." The lady gently asked her, "Would it be okay if you go home with me?" Oma declined because she was scared and didn't know Lady Margaret's intentions toward her. Meanwhile, Lady Margaret had been married for 10 years without a child, so she told Oma to think about it, saying she was harmless and only wanted to help her and give her a good life. Oma thought about it and decided to follow her when she came around next. A few months passed, but Lady Margaret never showed up again. Oma waited and prayed that the lady would come by again, but Lady Margaret had travelled out of the country for a conference and would be there for some months before returning to the state. As Oma's pregnancy pressed on to 8 months, she became so scared and worried because she hadn't gotten any baby things. She regretted not following Lady Margaret on that fateful day. But then, on second thought, she said to herself, "It's fine, I was also trying to stay safe." She cried bitterly in her heart, cursing Albert for putting her in such a dramatic and painful situation. The return of Lady Margaret. A few hours later, Lady Margaret drove down to her usual spot and met Oma. Immediately Oma saw her, she jumped up with so much happiness. Lady Margaret asked her, "How are you today, my dear Oma, and your baby?" Oma gently said, "We are fine today, just that I haven't had anything to eat since morning," with tears rolling down her eyes. Lady Margaret asked her to get into the car. With all gladness, Oma entered, and they zoomed off. They got home, and as Oma came down from the car, she looked around the whole mansion in surprise, as she had never seen such a mansion in her entire life. She calmly asked Lady Margaret, "I'm sorry to ask, Ma, but is this your mansion?" Lady Margaret smiled and whispered in Oma's ear, "Yes, my darling, it's my mansion." Lady Margaret asked her to come inside the house so she could at least freshen up and eat. Oma was so excited, but then she remembered her poor mother. At this point, there was nothing she could do. Lady Margaret showed her around the house, as she was a busy person. She asked Oma to relax, and if she needed anything, she should not hesitate to let her know. Oma knelt down and thanked her very much. Lady Margaret, knowing fully well that it was almost time for Oma's delivery, went straight to a baby shop down the estate and bought her everything she needed. Lady Margaret came back, gave her the things she had bought for her and her baby. Out of shock and surprise, Oma slumped on the floor. Lady Margaret rushed her to the hospital, and the doctor revived her. He told her to have some bed rest, as she may go into labor at any moment. Lady Margaret stayed with her in the hospital. A few hours later, labor started, and Oma gave birth to a bouncing baby boy. 2 days later, Oma was sound and strong, and the baby too. Lady Margaret paid the hospital bill and took them home. 6 months later, Lady Margaret called Oma and asked her about her family. Oma told her everything that had happened in the past. Lady Margaret felt pity for her and asked her to take her to her mother so they could bring her with them. That fateful morning, they all dressed up looking so beautiful and drove to where her mother lived. On getting there, they found her mother sick and no one was taking care of her. Lady Margaret took her to the hospital and took care of her until she got better. Oma and her mother became Lady Margaret's only family, as she was an orphan and an only child, just like Oma. Meanwhile, Lady Margaret is the CEO of P&P Oil and Gas, where Albert works. 2 years later, Lady Margaret took Oma to her office to introduce her as the new manager of her company. Since she was not always in town, she needed Oma to manage the company for her while she was away. That fateful Monday morning, every staff member was already seated, waiting for the CEO and the new manager. Oma never knew it was the same company where Albert worked. Immediately Albert laid his eyes on Oma, he became stunned, as she looked extremely beautiful. Albert excused himself and went straight to the restroom, with his heart pounding. He was confused about how Omer got to know the CEO of P&P Oil and Gas. He couldn't answer that question, so he composed himself and went back to the meeting hall. Omer stared at him and pretended they had never met before. Lady Margaret proceeded with the introduction of the new manager of P&P Oil and Gas in the person of Omer. Every staff member stood and clapped for her, including Albert. Omer appreciated each and every one of them, and they all exchanged pleasantries. Albert came to congratulate her, but she snubbed him and went ahead, greeting others. Albert felt so ashamed of himself. That was the beginning of the show. A few hours after the introduction of the new manager, Albert was no longer comfortable. He kept thinking about the scenario that had played out a few hours ago, but he couldn't comprehend it. So the day ended. The next morning, Omer resumed work fully as the managing director of P&P Oil and Gas Company. At this point, Omer had practically become Albert's boss. Life happens. 1 month later. Omer never spoke to Albert about the past. They kept focusing on their work. Albert had been looking for a way to ask Omer about the pregnancy, but he felt so ashamed to ask her such a silly question. So he respected himself and focused on his work, not knowing Omer's next intentions toward him. Albert kept summoning the courage to see if he could have a conversation with Omer, but Omer became so uptight that she didn't even look at him twice. 6 months later, the company arranged a get-together party. When Albert heard about the party, he was so excited, hoping to have a chance to talk to Omer. Ever since he laid his eyes on her in the company, his curiosity about the pregnancy increased. He wanted to know everything that had happened and also what happened to the child. On the party night, Albert tried all possible ways to speak with Omer, but she denied him all access. By this point, Omer had grown into a tough, matured, beautiful lady, the kind of class Albert needed. The party ended, and yet he couldn't speak to Omer. He drank himself up and went home frustrated. At home, Omer got home that night, with the thought of sharing her past life with Albert, Lady Margaret, and her mother. Omer served dinner that night on their dining table. On the plate was a delicious fried rice and fried chicken. Everyone ate and was happy. Omer called Lady Margaret and her mother and said, "There is something I want to share with both of you." Lady Margaret and Omer's mother anxiously looked at her and said, "What is it, my dear? You can tell us anything, and we won't judge you." She knelt down and appreciated Lady Margaret for giving her and her son a new life, and her mother too. She said, "I want to reveal the identity of my son's father." Lady Margaret was so happy that at least she knew who got her pregnant. Omer said, "The Albert who works in your company was the one who got me pregnant and denied it." Lady Margaret and her mother shouted, "What?" Her mother burst into tears, but Lady Margaret made her stop crying and said, "Mama, there's no need to cry. Let's find a way to fix things right." Lady Margaret asked, "What do you want to do with this man? Do you want to sack him?" "Whatever you want, I'm strongly behind you." Omer replied, "I will deal with him personally. See you all in part 2.